Chapter 24. Before I headed home, I tried again to get my mother to confide in me. It was impossible for me to believe that she wouldn't, but she didn't. She was angry about being in the county jail, and I was angry too. Her situation wasn't likely to change soon unless she came clean with the sheriff. I want you to be innocent, I said when I was saying goodbye. Mom said she loved me and that I should take care of myself. She said a lot of things, but she never said she was innocent. On the way home, I had to pass the subdivision where Lil had bought a fancy new home after her husband's death. I turned in there, wondering about a few things. As I drove up the cottonwood tree-lined lane, I thought that if I had her money, I would have bought a place with an awe-inspiring view. But maybe things like scenery and the beauty of the natural world didn't matter to a woman like Lil. As Norma had been only about Norma, Lil was all about Lil. After speaking with Dr. Estrada, I was convinced they had never been about each other, which was what was causing me to do the wondering. When Lil opened the door, her displeasure at seeing me was so obvious it was comical. "Hello, Lil," I said, and removed my hat. "May I speak to you a moment?" I'd picked up a fresh uniform at the cleaners and knew I looked as sharp as the knife that ended Norma's miserable life. When I went anywhere, I liked to look good. But when I was preparing to face an enemy, I made an extra effort. "I suppose you want to come in," she said with a sigh. I stepped inside. "Thank you for the hospitality." Her house was new and still smelled of fresh lumber. It was a pleasant odor, but under that was something that wasn't. The living room was beautifully decorated with expensive things, but I thought it was an unhappy little woman's attempt to make herself seem as normal and worthwhile as the next person. I found that sad, but didn't dwell on it. I sat on the edge of a beige sofa where Lil indicated I should. "I hope this won't take long," she said. "I just have a few questions." "More questions? Couldn't you gather them up and ask them all at once instead of constantly bothering people?" "It would be nice if investigating worked that way, but it doesn't." I didn't bother to try to explain it. "What do you want to know now?" "Do you know a man named Chapo Rodriguez?" An odd look passed over her face. "No. Who is he?" "Well, perhaps it doesn't matter. If you don't know him, then it doesn't." Except I thought she did. "You said that you and Norma were still close. Didn't you say that?" She sighed. "Yes, that's what I said." "Sander says you weren't. He told me Norma had pulled away from you because she blamed you for the mess at Doctores Fronterizos. He said you never saw much of each other after that." Lil's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away from me. "That's not true. Sander didn't know anything about our friendship or about what Norma did when she wasn't with him." Lil stood and began to rearrange the books and magazines on the coffee table. I thought it was odd, and it left me fairly speechless. After they were perfectly stacked, largest on the bottom in order from largest to smallest, she made sure the edges came together just right. Then she moved to some attractive bookshelves nearby and began to rearrange the framed photos there. She checked all the books, running one finger over the spines. Everything looked perfectly in order to me, but she didn't seem satisfied. She glanced over at her shoulder at me once with a furtive look. I wasn't sure what I should do. Did it mean something besides the general strangeness I'd always associated with Lil? I wondered what the sheriff would do. "My husband's been dead 2 years," she said suddenly, to a question I hadn't even asked or even thought of. "I know, Lil. I'm sorry." "I was thinking of your husband," she said, really surprised me. "He was very young and handsome, wasn't he?" "Yes, he was." "Do you miss him?" "So much." All the time, every minute of every day and night. I wondered if I would become as obsessive as Lil. Suddenly my heart softened toward her. She had lost a husband too. I didn't want her to be guilty of buying a murder, another thing I was wondering about. I wanted to leave her alone with her craziness and her memories. I wanted to get the hell out of her house and be alone to obsess on my own memories. I would run my finger along them like Lil did her books. "Lil, I know, I should do this later." And she sat back down, just like that. "I assume you didn't see Norma as often as you did when you were coming south for board meetings." "That's true, but we were still friends. I don't care what Stanner thought. We would email and talk on the phone, and whenever she came to Alpine, we'd go to lunch." The emailing and phoning could be checked out with a warrant, not that I had much hope of getting one from our judge. And then I thought of another way to check her story. I stood and thanked Lil for her time. She took the hand I offered. "I'm sorry about your husband," she said. "I mean it sincerely. Even you didn't deserve that." She had managed to stroke and slap me at the same time. Typical Lil. I roared back to Terlingua with a lot of things dancing through my brain. My mother was acting squirrely. Lil was pure squirrel. Roger Lockey had lied about the dogs being out. Chapo was up to something. Stanner was finally free of Norman. Alibi or not, with Norma out of his way, Gabe Stanton could now get custody of his son Joey like he wanted. All of them appeared guilty. But of murder? Was there someone else I was overlooking? That had to be it. As I came off the hill onto the flats that stretched for miles toward the mountains of South County, a strong gust of wind shook the Explorer. I thought about Kevin being in the wind. If he was in the wind, then it stood to reason he was also in the mountains and the river and in the wide blue sky. He was in me and I was in him, and it would always be like that. I thought most likely that was all I was ever going to understand about it. Barney looked up from his desk. You look fantastic. Thanks. I feel good. I haven't felt this good in a long time. You're coming back. Yes, I think I am. That's good, Ricos. I feel like hugging you. Do it then. He came around his desk and gave me a bear hug. Afterwards, he sat. Did your mother give up her secrets? I took my usual place in front of his desk. No, she refuses to talk to me. I'm going to talk to my dad and see if he knows anything. Sheriff Ben released the crime scene, and it was cleaned up this morning by some of the maids from the Big Ben Motor Inn. The Bates family is back at home. That's great, because I need to go back there, and I was dreading that smell. Why are you going there again? I want to look at Norma's computer. In fact, if Stanner will let me, I'm going to bring it here. What do you have in mind? On the way back, I stopped at Lil's. She insists that she and Norma were still friends and were emailing each other and phoning back and forth. She's lying, and I think I can prove it. What's your point? What if Lil stabbed her or paid Chapo to do it? I think you're grasping at straws. Well, I have to grasp at something. I told him about my talk with Dr. Estrada, which seemed to only mildly interest him, even when I showed him the paper she gave me. I couldn't get the accomplices who become victims idea out of my head. What about your mother? I don't want her to be guilty. He gave me a look, but was gracious enough not to say anything. Stanner is a small man, not much taller than me. He always seemed serious, but when he opened the door, he seemed smaller and sadder than I had ever seen him. His eyes were red, his clothes disheveled, and he needed a shave. When he shook my hand, he looked like he would cry. It was hard to imagine him as a killer. He had always impressed me as kind and soft-spoken, the opposite of his abrasive wife. Are you all right, Stanner? I'm fine. It's just hard without Norma, and the kids miss her so much. I apologize for not coming before to tell you how sorry I am. I know you're busy trying to find her killer. Yes, I am. May I look at your computer, Stanner? Well, sure. You can take it if you need to. I barely know how to use it. Just bring it back when you're through with it. The kids play on it sometimes. I won't need it long. Do you think her killer was emailing her? I don't know. I thought her emails might tell me something. I don't know now. May I look at your long-distance phone records, too? Sure. If it helps you find Norma's killer, look at anything you like. He took me to a desk and went through files until he came to phone records. The last phone call Norma made to Lil was 6 months after the Doctores Fronterizos lawsuit ended. That didn't mean Lil hadn't called her, but I thought it was unlikely. With Stanner's records, I could get a court order for Lil's if I needed one, but I left them with him for the time being. Norma's computer might have told me a lot if I was a genius with computers, but I'm not. Still, I could check her sent mail folder. It told the same story as the phone records, but in more detail. The last email she sent to Lil read, Please don't continue to contact me. You brought all this on yourself by being stupid, and I have wasted a great deal of my time. I can't continue to be friends with you under any circumstance. Norma Bates. What a sweetheart. I continued to nose around and found 5 emails she sent Lil about paying someone to do something. By putting all 5 together, I figured out that the 2 of them had been conspiring to have my mother killed. That was before the lawsuit and mediation, when they were still trying to get her to step down from her position. Dr. Estrada had said it was antisocial personality disorder. I thought Norma had been a remorseless bitch. I wondered where she had gone. I didn't believe in hell, but I didn't think she was in the wind either. I was running back down my road. Darkness was settling on the land I loved, and a sliver of moon was already up and alert, waiting for what the night would bring. Ahead, in the last of the dying light, I could see my father's truck in front of my house. How convenient, since he was on my list. Inconvenient, because I was wearing the shorts he kept forbidding me to wear. He didn't seem to notice how I was dressed, and that worried me. Something big was on his mind. I pulled on sweatpants, got us each a glass of water, and settled myself in a rocker in front of him. ¿Qué pasa, papi? Mija, he said, and didn't continue. I realized there were tears in his eyes. What's wrong? I have to tell you something. I'd hoped never to have to tell you. It would be hard to hear, but it's much harder to tell. He took a deep breath and swiped one of his hands across his eyes. Your mother was being blackmailed by that Bates woman, and I think she may have killed her. This was bad. If Papi thought Mom could be guilty, it was practically a death sentence. I was astounded. I waited quietly until he continued. A long time ago, he began, and then he stopped and started again. Your mother can be a very difficult woman. She was always a little on the wild side and didn't want to settle down. The first time I saw her, I fell in love with her. I took her to a few dances, but couldn't get close to her, except for kissing. In the dim light spilling from my house, I could see that my dad had gotten red. He never talked of these things with me. I soon found out she was sleeping with another man, which I took hard, since she said she loved me, and she wasn't sleeping with me. I don't like telling you this, mija, but I have to. It's okay, Papi. I'm a grown woman. Yes, but you can still be hurt. I thought that was an odd comment, but I knew he would get to the point eventually if I could be patient. I asked your mother to marry me, and she said she couldn't because she was pregnant. I was young enough and crazy about her, and I thought we could make it work in the way young people always think things will work. She was pregnant with the other man's child, you see. Papi, what does this have to do with me? She was pregnant with you, Margarita. I stared at my father. It was so ridiculous I could have laughed out loud, except the suffering on his face was real and brutally etched there. I went the route of least resistance, which of course was denial. No, I said, as if the word could change it. Yes, mija, I am not your biological father. I love you as my own. It'd be impossible for me to love you more than I do. But how can I look so much like you? I always thought that was a miracle. The first time I saw your face, I had the same question. It seemed like it was God's way of telling me I'd done the right thing. I've never regretted it. But couldn't you be mistaken? Maybe I really am yours. Mija, of course you're mine. He touched his hand to his heart. In here, you're mine and I'm yours. Eventually, I must stop making the distinction between your real father and me because I was your real father in every way that counted. I sat in stunned silence, staring at the man who had always been my father and always would be. We meant to tell you, but we just never did. Years passed, and the longer we waited, the less necessary it seemed. I'm sorry we didn't tell you, but I don't think you would have loved me any less, and I hope you won't love me less now. I'm just so surprised, Papi. Of course I love you the same. You never treated me like anything but your daughter. It's just hard to believe. That's all. I can't take it in. When Norma started blackmailing your mother, it was after Kevin died, and we wanted to tell you, but it seemed too cruel. It still seems cruel, and I didn't want to tell you at all, but you need to know. Your mother will go to prison before she'll do anything to hurt you. How could Norma Bates possibly know anything about this? She didn't even live here then. Your father came into quite a lot of money, and he wanted to set up a will that included you. He called me and said he'd never done anything for you and wanted to do that much. I had no objection. Please, don't call him my father. He must have a first name. Call him by that. His name is Ezekiel, but he's called Zeke. My father looked pained, like the mention of the name was hurtful. Go on, Papi, I said softly. Zeke went to an attorney where he lived near Austin, and that attorney turned out to be Norma Bates's brother. He must have mentioned to Norma that someone in Terlingua stood to inherit a fortune, and he told her Zeke's story. When she found out it was you, she thought of a way to hurt your mother. If my mother said she loved you, why was she sleeping with Zeke? I don't know, mija. Your mom was confused. My mother's behavior was unforgivable. No, don't be hard on her. Once you were born, she settled down and was a good mother. Eventually, she fell in love with me. She grew up and became a good wife, and we never looked back. We set about raising you and loving each other, and neither of us have any regrets about it. Papi sighed as if he bore the weight of the world. She is going to be furious that I told you, but it is the only way you can help her. Whether she killed Norma or not, you need to know why she's acting like she is. She wants to protect you at all costs. What was Zeke like? He was a good man, a very fine-looking man. Like your mother, he hadn't really grown up. He was irresponsible, but not a bad guy, Poppy sighed. I was responsible enough for everybody. I love you, Poppy. I love you too, more than anything. It wasn't a mistake that we were put together. No, it wasn't. Thank you for being responsible. He smiled at me, a smile so full of love, I felt knocked down by it. I thought I should be mad, but how could I be mad at a man who had loved and taken responsibility for me before I was even born? He was 8 years younger than my mom. Shouldn't she have been the responsible one? I pictured him carrying me around on his shoulders and with me holding him by the hair. He took me rafting and taught me to ride, rope, and track. When I begged to know how to shoot a gun, he taught me that too. He would run boys away from the house late at night when they'd come around asking me to party. He taught me more things of value than I could ever count. He had always been there for me since my earliest memories and continued to be. No, if I was angry, it was with my mother. What had she been thinking and why hadn't she told me this herself? My dad was headed down my porch steps when he turned back. There's one more thing I should tell you. I didn't think my heart could take another thing so soon, but I couldn't speak to tell him that. He began to pass his hat back and forth nervously. I told you, Kevin died instantly, and that wasn't completely true. Oh, God. Mitch and I ran out to him. He was barely conscious, but I don't think he was feeling any pain. Mitch and I agree on that. We knelt beside him, and I took his hand. He murmured, Margarita. And then he was gone. I thought you should know that. I think he meant to tell me he loved you. I know he did, and his last thought was of you. I couldn't tell you before because I couldn't. Mitch wanted to, but he couldn't too. It was so hard being there. My eyes filled with tears so that I could barely see him. I know, Poppy. Thank you for being there and for telling me.